transition from zero emission buildings to energy and climate positive cities. So that sort of spans the topics that I'm going to touch upon, and I will then mainly illustrate this through different research centers and projects that I've been involved in. So yeah, outline. First, 2 slides about myself and some early work. I have to say something about NTNU, the university I'm from, and my department. I will use a bit more time on the Zero Emission Building Research Center and the CEN Zero Emission Neighborhoods Research Center, and also give some examples from 2 EU projects, Synerkia and Green Deal IRU, that I've been connecting to, and also a bit on laboratory developments. So myself, I have a PhD in building physics, heat transfer in window frames and windows. A PhD is usually a narrow study, and also for me. But then I started as an associate professor in Department of Civil Engineering and moved on to Department of Architecture and Technology in 2007. And then starting as the director of the Research Center on Zero Emission Buildings in 2012. The center started in 2009, so I was a work package leader to begin with. And then working in the CEN Center for 6 years before becoming head of the department 3 years ago. So in the beginning, it was a lot of simulations and experiments on windows and window frames, doing computational fluid dynamics and also experimental studies. So just to show where I came from. So this is a flow pattern inside air cavity. And I sort of had some PhD students working in this area also since, but usually then in larger scales. And also throughout my research, I've been trying to connect experimental studies with numerical simulations, always finding that very useful and also necessary to verify the numerical simulations we do. And I also think that is why we often work with, or almost always work with industry and real projects in the centers and the research project we have set up, connecting more the sometimes theoretical side with the practical side. NTNU. NTNU stands for Norwegian University of Science and Technology. It's the largest university in Norway. The main profile is in science and technology, but also include other areas such as humanities, social sciences, medicine, fine arts and performing arts. And the main campus is in Trondheim, where I'm located. But we also have campuses in Gjøvik for the south, and Ålesund, which is on the northwest coast. Some key figures: 8 faculties, 55 departments, about 7,000 person years, and more than 44,000 students. Yeah, I think I'll skip to the department. So the department has around 70 employees, 530 students. We have 3 or 4 study programs, 5-year integrated master in architecture, and a 2-year master program in architecture. We also have the 2-year master in sustainable architecture, which is an international program. We also have the traditional building crafts bachelor program. And yeah, you see the goal is to contribute to the development of circular architecture and built environment through research, architectural and artistic practice, and the education of independent candidates with integrated knowledge within architectural design and aesthetic expertise. So we have architects and artists. We work on tectonics and the construction understanding. So we have civil engineers, and also preservation and further development of the existing built environment, and also energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in the built environment. And this also connects a bit to the way we're organized in 4 research groups, taking care of these 4 areas. Even though my presentation will focus a lot on research, education is, of course, just as important. And the result there is, of course, the candidates using their knowledge in the industry when they start after their studies. This is from 2022, when we had around 50 candidates in the master program in sustainable architecture. Large, nice group. And this is a program that IFO was connected to, actually. Just to show a bit about this program, it sort of with 4 semesters. The first one is centered around climate and built form. Second one is emissions and as design drivers. And we have integrated energy design in the third semester, and the thesis, master thesis in the last semester. Then to the research. And of course, there are connections between research and teaching. A lot of the thesis work is connecting to the research projects. So we see a lot of synergies there. The background, and I'll still repeat it briefly. The buildings and building construction sectors combined are responsible for 36% of the global final energy consumption and then 40% of the total direct and indirect CO2 emissions. And this might double or potentially triple if we don't do anything with the way we construct buildings. And this is because of increased access to adequate housing and related facilities for people in developing countries, and also population growth, migration to cities, household size changes, and increasing levels of wealth and lifestyle. So this is sort of the background why we have been working on making more sustainable buildings and also infrastructure, and also connecting to mobility and transport in the later research centers. And this is, of course, also connected to the UN sustainability goals. I think you can mention many of them here. I picked 4. Number 7, affordable and clean energy. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. 13, climate action. And partnerships for the goals. I think these are maybe the key ones we are touching upon in our research centers and projects. Do we do questions at the end? Is that, yeah? Okay, yeah. So when I'm done, okay. Otherwise, you could also raise your hand. That was what I was maybe aiming for, but it's okay. It's a bit up to you. Okay, but the ones online, would they hear us?
Yeah, they can hear us. If they raise their hands, I should be able to spot it.
Okay. Okay, I'll just go on, and if you have something, just interrupt me. Okay, that's fine. Okay, the 2 research centers. This is part of a research program by the Norwegian Research Council that was announced in 2008 after the government had an agreement that they needed to speed up the transition. So then they allocated more money to research on environmental friendly energy topics. And we were 1 out of 8 centers starting in 2009, and we had the name Research Center on Zero Emission Buildings. And the vision is to eliminate the greenhouse gas emissions caused by buildings. And then in 2016, it was a new announcement because these centers are funding for 5 + 3 years. So there's an evaluation after 4.5 years, and if you're successful, you get the funding also for the last 3 years. So yeah, and then in 2017, we won a new center, Research Center on Zero Emission Neighborhoods in smart cities, so sort of changing the scale from individual buildings to a group of buildings. And then the vision was sustainable neighborhoods with net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And what we have found to be useful is to have a clear vision, and then gather researchers that are needed to address this vision, and then construct the research center from that. Is that from? It's not my under my control. Okay, and then Yeah, the objective for the SEB Center was to develop competitive products and solutions for existing and new buildings that should lead to market penetration buildings with net zero greenhouse gas emission related to their production, operation, and demolition. And before 2009, most of the focus was on the operational phase. Not a lot was done on the construction phase and also the demolition phase. So we started using LCA methods to analyze the environmental burden of buildings during their life cycle. I'll get back to this. And then in 2017, so in the SEB Center, we saw that making each building a net zero emission building is not possible always because of the site, because of the type of building. So then the idea is rather to address a neighborhood or a group of buildings in order to aim for the same ambition level environmentally, but then in a more holistic way. So the objective then was to speed up decarbonization of the building stock, both existing and new, use more renewable energy sources and create positive synergies among the building stock, energy, ICT, and mobility systems and citizens. And you can find a lot more information about the centers on those different web pages. The SEB Research Center were divided in 5 work packages, working from the material level up to making real buildings. So work package 1 was on advanced material technologies. I think someone mentioned nano materials yesterday, and we were trying to make nano insulation materials. And of course, making envelope technologies out of the individual materials was a topic. So they're illustrated by a LECO Isoblock. It's a masonry system where we combined vacuum insulation panel inside a construction system to take down the width or the thickness of the elements. And of course, energy supply systems and services is important. And also energy efficient use and operation. So here we connect with the social sciences to analyze operation of the buildings. And work package 5 is where it all comes together in developing concepts and strategies for zero emission buildings. And then real demonstration buildings is important. And also work package 5 work quite a lot on the definition of a zero emission building, that what this was all about. And I'll get back to that in the next slide. Yeah, but what I also should say is working on the building scale is also very multidisciplinary. So we had architects, mechanical engineers, building physicists, material scientists, and social scientists. So we started out with a quite diverse group of researchers, and which seems narrow today when they are moved to the neighborhood scale and the city scale. But when we started this, making those different disciplines talk, of course they do that in building projects, but research-wise and also connecting research to practice, it took quite a lot of effort to make this run smoothly. Yeah, so then a definition of the zero emission building. So the main concept, as it's written here, of a SEB building is that renewable energy sources produced or transformed at the building site have to compensate for CO2 emissions from the operation of the building and for production, transport, and demolition of all the building materials and components during the life cycle of the building. So then this is a very simplified version. Working with industry is always helpful to try to simplify, but there is a lot of calculation procedures underneath. So it's about accounting material emissions, construction use emissions, and also from the demolition phase, and having renewable energy on the building or on the building site to compensate for all the emissions. And then usually have lifespan of 60 years for the building. That's what we're using to calculate during the life cycle. And of course, this is very ambitious. So we made different ambition levels that the industry could aim for. So this is illustrated here, where we have zero emission buildings in the use phase. So the amount of renewable energy is equal to the amount of emissions coming out of the use phase. And of course, you can work with the different parts here, either to reduce emissions connected to the different phases or to increase the renewable energy production. And what we see is that the zero emission building concept results in a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. It results in energy efficient building designs, new local renewable energy production, reduction of material use, use of environmental friendly materials and reuse of materials, and also solutions in general, and optimization of energy flow. In Norway, of course, these buildings are connected to the grid, so we will have a surplus of energy in our renewable energy production in the summertime, and we need to use energy from the grid in the winter time. And this is sort of the various ambition levels. I guess IFA has always shown you this. You assume, I know. So having these various ambition levels was very useful, because then you can set one together with the industry for a specific project. So for instance, I think one of the high schools were aiming for zero emission buildings, including operation and materials. But when making the design, they found out that this was really hard. Of course, they tried and tried and tried, but they end up with zero emission buildings and 20% of the materials. So you might say they are cheating a bit, but when this is the first time you do it, you have to learn and understand what kind of materials influence the balance the most. And yeah, so you learn and you might do it differently next time. Yeah, and then we see that also in the EU, they are referring to some of this work. So you see that what we did quite early is now coming into the way we define zero emission building or net zero emission buildings on the EU level, at least part of it. They're also, of course, influenced by other research results, but that is to see some influence, and that's good. Yeah, and also throughout the research, as said, we've been working very closely with the industry, and we had the first working definition available after half a year, sort of very simplified, and then we used that together with the partners. And I think especially two projects in the beginning. This is a renovation project, an office building close to Oslo, and this is south of Oslo, a dwelling demonstration building. And using those real cases to learn from. So we first develop it in the research environment, and then we use it and we take the knowledge back and iterate several times to refine the definition. And these are the partners. NTNU is the host, but we work very closely with SINTEF. That is an independent research organization with researchers, and usually we at the university are more fundamental in our research, but still quite applied, especially in the Department of Architecture and the Civil Engineering Department. And the SINTEF researchers are usually closer to the industry, with researchers also doing analysis of specific products and product development with the industry. So we have a lot of good collaboration among or between those two organizations. Then we have partners. Some are on the material level. Some are making a building, some on technical entrepreneurs. Weber is a material producer. And we also connect to governmental agency, like where's that? Like the Directorate for Building Quality that are making the building regulations in Norway. So we also see that or discuss with them how our research can have most impact on what they are going to develop further. All right. One example. This is a SEB pilot house in Larvik. Owner Brødrene Dal and Optimera, architect Snøhetta. And let's see. So the ambition level here was zero emission buildings, including operation and materials. Different technologies are used, reuse of bricks, use of wood instead of concrete. We also combine different system, heat pump, photovoltaics, and also solar collector on the roof. One specific example, the architect and the developer wanted thermal storage inside the building. And they were originally planning to use regular concrete, but found that sort of took up the emissions too much. And they looked at the alternative concrete systems and ended up with reused bricks that were found in a barn that was taken down in the not far from the building. So they reduced the material emissions quite a lot. And also in the beginning, this was quite new work. It was hard to find data. So working with the material producers to come up with data for the different technologies was an important task. And of course, low carbon concrete in the foundation. Steel is quite a lot. And also the PV system that sort of is needed to have negative emissions is also contributing quite a lot to the material emissions as such. But what you see even in Norway, that the payback time for the PV is 3 to 7 years, depending on the efficiency and depending on what kind of materials are used to make the photovoltaics. So it can vary quite a lot, sort of the investment cost of the different products. So in the end, we had this result. You see the energy use for operation is the yellow one, renewable energy production is the green, and the blue one is energy use for material production. So this was the technical regulation at that time, and we took down the operational energy and also added a lot of renewable energy. This is just one of the examples. And we also did a study to look at the energy efficiency potential for the whole Norwegian building stock based on the different zero emission building ambition levels. So here we have a look at this one. This is the distribution of the building stock in Norway, 70% residential, 30% office building. And based on historic development, we have sort of tried to predict into the future what will happen. And also it's a prediction. And also based on previous numbers, how much will be new buildings, how much will be upgraded, and how much will be unchanged. And then the start time is 2020 and going all the way to 2050. And then based on different energy performance levels, we can see how the different definitions can contribute to reducing the energy use in buildings into the future. So we have a SEB scenario and we have an ambitious SEB scenario. And we see because buildings are being taken down and improved, you will have some decrease. So some decrease with even the baseline scenario. If you improve the energy performance requirement in the building regulation, you can achieve more.
Yeah. Organization of electricity. So this unchanged 2020.
Yeah, that's because
it's million square meters.
Yeah, it's million square meters. Yeah, so it's amount of buildings being upgraded, and some buildings will never be upgraded because they are listed. Yeah, or maybe they are too new, or yeah, you have to do some assumptions here, but this is yeah. And then about the CEN, zero emission neighborhoods, and we were talking about logos yesterday. The SEB one is here. So we used a designer to come up with this. I like this one very much, actually, the SEB one. The CEN one, maybe not so much, but it's still okay. Of course, CEN is also have other meanings. So was discussing quite a lot. We were discussing quite a lot in the beginning, but so this is at least the conclusion, which we have been working on since the start in 2017. Also here we do collaborate a lot with the building industry, both and also the private sector and the public sector. When you go from the building scale to the neighborhood scale, we also get more municipalities involved. So Bodø kommune, Bergen kommune, and small ones, and us, Trondheim and Bærum. So those were involved, and also this Directorate for Building Quality, setting the building regulations, and also in the private sector we have both from architects, entrepreneurs, and also energy companies. That was what I was supposed to mention. So when we move to the neighborhood scale, we also need to address the energy system. So that's why we also have energy companies included. So the vision here was mentioned before, also sustainable neighborhoods with zero greenhouse gas emissions. The definition is, of course, more complex when you go to the neighborhood. And I will read this. A neighborhood is defined as a group of interconnected buildings with associated infrastructure located within a confined geographical area. So now we do not only look at the individual building, but also what is between the buildings, what it takes to make the area into a livable space. And as I said, buildings can be of different types, for instance, new, existing, retrofitted, or a combination. Infrastructure includes grids and technologies for exchange, generation, and storage of electricity and heat. Infrastructure may also include grids and technologies for water, sewage, waste, and mobility, and ICT. So it aims to reduce its direct and indirect greenhouse gases towards zero within its life cycle. And the life cycle or the expected life cycle can be different for different technologies. So for the building, we use still 60 years, but for infrastructure, we have used 100 years. And it's connected to standards for calculation of emissions. And also here we work with this demonstration projects, and it's an iterative process. You see version 3. So it's like doing this together with together with the partners. And to be a bit more specific, so for the CEN or a zero emission neighborhood needs to perform on many levels, and we have quite many performance indicators. So the greenhouse gas emissions is the most important one, taking down this one. They also look at energy, and then energy flexibility has come up as an important topic to both to improve the security of the grid, but also to make sure we use the renewable energy locally when it is available. Economy, innovation. I think this one was taken out in the last guideline. So it's still under revision, the power and spatial qualities, and mobility. And this center we organized as shown in this slide. Working package 1, working on making an analytical framework for design and planning of zero emission neighborhoods. Work package 2 on policy measures, innovation, and business models. And many of the partners are actually very much interested in new business models. When you ask what they are aiming for through their participation, new business model is coming up quite high on the list. More technological work packages, work package 3, 4, and 5. Number 3 is on responsive and energy efficient building. Number 4 is on energy flexible neighborhoods, looking at interaction between buildings. And number 5 is local energy system optimization with the larger system, because of course the individual neighborhoods are connecting to the larger energy system, and we acknowledge this and work on this also as a research topics. Yeah. And number 6 again is on pilot projects and living labs. And in the SEN Center, we have 9 pilot projects from Bodø in the north, up here, where the city is going to move an airport to a different location, and redevelop part of the city based on that, to Fornebu in the south, part of Bærum kommune, south of Oslo. There is both new developments and redevelopment or transformation of existing buildings. And there are both, the timeline here is very different from the projects. We have one, where is that? Campus Evenstad. It's a school area owned by the governmental building developer. So this one is sort of finished. It's a lot of PV on some of the buildings. There are storage systems. It's combined heat and power. And here it's about testing systems for efficient operation. But others are more in the early stage, and then we work more on making new development tools to address the SEN concept. Yeah. One example from Idalir. It's a new development in a small municipality north of Oslo. So we did the life cycle analysis for this area, and based on an LCA standard. So it shows what we address. We don't start with everything, but we include part of the picture. But we look at the building, we looked at mobility, looked at the infrastructure and the networks connecting the buildings, and also an on-site energy production. And different, this is an early study, and this is the result. So we see that mobility, it's far more larger than compared to the buildings. So the buildings are already quite emission friendly, and I think that in Norway relates to that we have a lot of hydropower, clean hydropower to operate the buildings. And also we see that the infrastructure contributes less than the buildings and mobility up here. And we see that we have too little new renewable energy production to compensate. It again shows that this is very ambitious and very, very tough to achieve. I could have given several examples. I will here show one that illustrates that we work on mobility also. This is a part of Trondheim. Not easy to see, but we analyze the possibility to reach different areas from a specific location here by adding a bridge, an additional bridge over the river. And so then you can visualize to the using GIS, visualize to the municipality what the different measures. It was very dark, but you see at least this is without the bridge, and this is with the bridge. So you connect. It's much easier to gain access to this area. Of course, adding a bridge, but visualizing this in the support process or the decision process of the municipality is important to do. And also, most of the demonstration projects have been in Norway, of course. The funding is from the Norwegian government, but we have also had some studies looking at how this definition, the zero emission building definition, can be used elsewhere. So we had a PhD student, Daniel Satola, finishing about a year ago, I think. IFA and I was supervising him. So we looked at zero emission residential building concepts also in warm climates. And he, for instance, looked at one block of flats in India, I think it was, and see what can be achieved by applying these kind of definitions. Yeah. Some EU projects. We recently, or from 2020, also started to aim for funding from the European Union. Norway is not a member, full member of the European Union, but we're sort of an associate member, so we collaborate and can apply in the same way as full members. And we were lucky or clever the first time we did this. So first we won this Synekia project. Synekia is Greek word meaning neighborhood. And the project development is Niki Gaetani, that's from Greece. So that's why we have this language in here. So the main mission here is to increase the share of sustainable neighborhoods with a surplus of renewable energy in different contexts, climates and markets in Europe. And again, working with designers to come up with logos and visualization of what we do. And the other project, it's a bit newer. This is the ARV project. ARV is a Norwegian word meaning legacy or heritage. And here the concept is to contribute to a wide-scale implementation of climate-positive circular communities where people can thrive and prosper for generations to come. Again, there is a very multidisciplinary. I think I forgot to say that in the SENS Center, we have researchers from the university from 5 faculties. So it's engineering faculty, it's architecture, humanities, computer science, and the last one I don't remember right now, but but it's at least 5 faculties included. Economy, of course. Yeah, sorry. And again, working with designers, visualizing the concept and making the logo. So it's quite useful, and we do that very early, before in parallel with making the work packages and making the vision. So sort of what they do also feeds back into what we do on the research side, shaping the message. What are we going to achieve? Yes, so Synekia is from 2020 to 2025, 7.5 million euros. We're the coordinator with 15 partners, and it's working in a similar way as we do in the SEB and SENS Center with demonstration projects. But here we address in Synekia 4 demonstration projects: the Mediterranean climate, subarctic, which is Oslo, I think, continental and marine. And the ARV project has 6 demonstration projects from Mallorca in the south to Oslo in the north. I think in the south here is Barcelona as a city, and I think it's Netherlands and Austria. I can double check. Northern. What happened here? Norway, Netherlands, Austria, and Spain. Yes, that's Synekia. And of course, in EU project, you need to connect to the EU policies. So the innovation wave is important. PED, positive energy districts, addressing circular economy, digitalization, and the new European Bauhaus is important. And in the new European Bauhaus, also the aesthetics come more into the picture. And then being part of an architecture faculty or department is of course a possibility in that regard. In the Synergia project, we address both the building scale and the neighborhood scale to evaluate the demonstration projects. And in the IRIV project, Climate Positive Circular Communities, I thought I'd just mention the definition. I'll get back to how what do we quantify. But we look at the climate positive circular community as an urban area which aims to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions, enable energy flexibility, and promote a circular economy and social sustainability. And the CPCC concept focuses strongly on the interaction and integration between new and regenerated buildings, users, and energy systems facilitated by ICT to provide attractive, resilient, and affordable solutions for citizens. I will show you two examples, specific examples. This is in Oslo, Norway, Voldstøkka School and Cultural Area. So it's the construction of a new building and a renovation of an existing listed building. So we look at different technologies or solutions or user interaction methods in these projects. And those are listed on this slide. For instance, looking at circular renovation, design strategies, implementation of HR or VR tools, and a platform in decision-making processes. Implementing local renewable energy generation using building integrated with photovoltaics and building applied photovoltaics. So yeah, we can address and look at different technologies in the different areas. And this is the one in Denmark, Sønderborg. It's 19 apartment blocks of three floors, in total of 432 apartments constructed in the between 1970 to 1973 and renovated in 2010. And also looking at different technologies and different ways of engaging with the users in this project. And what you see at the bottom here is the partners connecting to this specific area. I'll get back to that, but what you will see as we often have a university partner, sort of being the academic link, and we have different industry partners delivering or developing different technologies to make the change happen. And we have specific goals for the demonstration projects. For interesting colors. So for the IRIV project, we are looking at energy, and we have specific levels we want to achieve, different for new buildings and for renovation projects. Also looking at indoor air quality, noise and dust, embodied emissions, the time frame, how much time it takes to develop the projects. Also looking at life cycle costs and construction costs. So the idea is then to innovate or research and innovate to start with, and to demonstrate in the real demo projects and scale it up by looking at business models to make that happen. So this is a concept both in the Synergia project and also in the IRIV project. I think I need to come to an end soon. And this is the way we have been working. As I said, we usually have research partners connecting to the industry in the different demonstration projects. And as another example, this is in the Netherlands. We have Utrecht University and a lot of companies connecting to the specific demonstration project. And I thought I would end with some slides about the laboratory facilities we also have developed during these 15-16 years. Because working with industry is of course important, but also having some own projects on campus has also been very useful for us. So we have been developing SEB Living Lab. It's a small residential building, 100 square meters, a lot of sensors, where we have tested different concepts with people living there. I will not go into detail there, but this is a picture from the inside. And we had 6 groups of people living there, 2 students, 2 elderly couple, and 2 families. And look at different results. Here we have energy consumption, energy use for one selected week for the 6 groups, lighting, socket, plug loads, appliances, hot water. And what can be of particular interest is, for instance, this family compared to the others. The socket, the plug loads, it's much bigger. It's the same building. It's about the same temperature, or maybe slightly colder here. But what they thought it was too cold in the building, so they brought in their own heater, which they plugged in and placed under the sensor controlling a central unit. So it in principle turned off and needed much more heating. So small differences in climate can change energy use quite a lot, of course. And of course, the comfort level you're expected to have or want to have also influence this quite a lot. Also that test cell lab is where we can test, it's a bit more laboratory oriented. It's more like 2 office spaces behind here, and we can expose facade elements to the real climate on the outside. The last one is a SEB laboratory, where 1,800 square meter living laboratory used as a regular office space for the researchers within these areas. A lot of sensors and also flexibility to do different experiments. And also, since there are laboratory buildings, we can explore more solutions compared to in the real demonstration projects, which are commercial and where taking too large risk can have bigger consequences. Yeah, and the final slide. Also, this SEB lab is a zero emission building, and we managed to be or to aim for obtain the SEB COM ambition level, construction phase, operation and material phase. And that was the design ambition. We are still in the process of getting there. We're not there yet, but we had to change the heat pumps. They were not according to the specifications. I think in a regular project, you would never measure so much that you were able to say they are not good enough. But here we do that. It's a laboratory building. We operate it ourselves. So we were able to change them, and hopefully now we will be closer to what we aimed for in the planning stage. But this is what we were calculating then. Okay, I think I'll stop there. So thank you.
Verification. So,
Yeah.
you know, in a laboratory setting, and you have a process, a method to verify what's been specified as what's actually delivered, and whether when it's delivered, it's actually working the way it's meant to. So in that scaling up process, you know, there's this innovate, demonstrate, and then scale up.
Yeah.
Have you then sort of incorporated this idea that actually a verification process is as important as anything else in that scaling up? Because, or is that not a?
It's been in the SEB project. we have been analyzing or measuring some of the building and checking how we match the design. I think, yeah, of course, there are two parts here. So we have learned a lot and have done some work on that. And we see that overall, I think we are able to quantify quite accurately, but there are some variations on the details. So you might have some more plug loads demands, you might have less PV, or so there are differences on the individual ones, but sort of when you look at the whole picture, there is quite good accuracy, at least for most of the buildings. Yeah, but we should do more on that, of course, in the real projects. And of course, some of the actors or partners in the project have project inside the center, but they also do things outside the center. And then we are not part of that and part of that evaluation project. But you see that more and more of the partners, at least the developers, also are implementing energy performance contracts. So they are putting requirements on the use phase energy demand. And have contracts on that for the developer to prove they are
Okay, so
on the demand. Yes.
So then you'd get verification on the outcomes as part of that. So
that's part of that. But we need, of course, at the university, we need funding to be able to follow up on all other projects. But the ones that are completing within the time frame of the project, we're able to follow up and monitor and evaluate. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I mean, the reason I asked the question is because my understanding of things like Passive House, one of the reasons it seems to work is this sort of close focus on verification, sort of unlike things like, the old BREEAM or LEED systems, which are on paper, they're great.
Yeah.
You actually put the thing together. And there was a wonderful book that came out a few years ago looking at 50 buildings all over the world built to mostly LEED, but, BREEAM or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they're terrible. Yeah. Most of them don't work. So I think this verification thing seems to me a very important aspect of what you're doing. So it's really good to see that.
But we could do more, of course. But what I think the building developers, at least when you own the building yourself in the operational phase, you should establish the energy performance contracts.
Yes.
Making sure the developer are following up on this. And it's also money connecting to this. If you don't deliver as planned, you have to pay some extra or change the building design or do changes to make it happen.
Yeah.
So there are possibilities there. I think that should be explored more, at least in Norway.
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So thanks, Nick, for bringing the mic over. So let's need to. Excellent.
Can I ask a question since I've got the mic? I got a question about timings. So my understanding with the zero emission buildings is that you're relying a lot on the energy generation at the building itself to give you negative emissions that you can then spend elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that the grid is already quite well decarbonized in Norway and probably heading in the right direction, same as it is in the UK, faster than the rest of the economy is decarbonizing. So I wonder if it's going to get harder to make a zero emission building over time, because that offsetting you're relying on is it's going to be harder to gain points for that compared to concrete and steel and the things that you still potentially need. Yeah. Is that an issue, do you think?
It's actually part of the CO2 factor, the payback factor, or whatever it will be in English. And it's been a big discussion because if we use the Norwegian CO2 factor connected to the Norwegian grid, it would be really hard because it's very small, 20 grams per kilowatt hours. But what we are part of the European grid. So we look at Norway. So what if we are able to export to Europe, we might take down coal-based electricity production in Poland, for instance. So we're taking this into account, and we're not using the CO2 factor for today, but we make a projection into the future to 2050 or something like that. So it's going down. and so that's part of the factor. But of course, the further you get into the future, this one will decrease and it will get harder. So I'm not sure we have solved that entirely, but it will be an important topic to look more at, I think, in the coming years. Yeah, but we're taking it into account today at least. Yeah.
And then as well on timing, so I guess you've got a spike of emission in construction, and then there's a delay before you get those net benefits.
Yeah, it is.
Have you looked at any sort of dynamic methods?
Yeah, some PhD candidate has done that. I'm not into all the details myself, but I could share a PhD thesis, I think, and also possibly a paper on that, looking a bit more on the dynamic aspects of this. Yeah.
And I assume with biogenic carbon that over the life cycle is neutralized, is it, in the methodology, or?
I'm not 100% sure of that.
So as in if you're using biogenic materials like timber, do they count as neutral?
No, actually, they are actually not neutral. They are actually contributing a bit because so it's conservative in that way, I think. At least that was in the start. I've been a bit out the last 2 years, but it might be a change there. But it's still a discussion topic, I know.
Yeah.
Just take Mike.
Okay. The dynamic emission factor, because that was a really important part that we found, was that, like you were saying, it was 20 grams when I started that work. It was like 40 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and we realized like that makes it very difficult to achieve that Z balance. And then, you know, together with Gråbakk, the work, they did this hourly study of the export and import of the electricity. And we found, you know, from Norway exporting across Nordel into Europe and back, you know, that we really need to take into account the higher carbon electricity coming into the country. And then, like you were saying about the decarbonization, we need to consider that as well. So that resulted in the development of the dynamic emission factor called the ZEB factor, which was 132 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And then that allowed us to sort of take into account that dynamic aspect for the operational emissions. And then the other element that we looked into was the PV. So the PV was one of the highest drivers of embodied emissions. And what we saw that was the lifetime of the PV module would be, say, 20 years, but you're replacing that obviously 2-3 times in that 60-year period. So we were looking at the point, you know, when you go to replace it, that the efficiency is actually 50% better. So we applied this sort of halving of the embodied emissions for the replacement point. So for the first 20 years, we used, you know, the normal sort of like
current
static
project.
But at the point of replacement, we started to consider this change in efficiency. So we did that for one material, and that definitely is a research area to look at this dynamic effect of other materials at these different replacement points in the future. Yeah.
It'd be nice to have that as a time graph. I know it's probably adding a bit more complexity, but I think it is a bit misleading to pretend that these big developments are zero.
No, they are not.
No,
not at all. And the less you build, the better.
Yeah.
So that's an aspect we need to bring more into the research.
And the biogenic aspect at that point with, you know, the early concepts. So we were using EPDs where we could, and at that point there wasn't consensus on whether you should use a negative factor or positive. So in some cases we actually used both and did sort of a sensitivity analysis for comparison. So it's definitely a really important area.
Again, it's oversimplified in like LTA codes now, where you just ignore biogenic because it's between the negative emission at the start and positive emission is assumed in the future, which is probably a little bit there's two extremes, right? You either take it as a negative number or you ignore it, and the reality is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I think it
Exactly.
can only really be captured with some kind of nod towards the dynamic
Yeah.
element.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a really crucial part. And on.
Anyone else? I think we're scheduled for a break. Officially 10:30 to 10:40, but I think we can all appreciate an extra 5 minutes. So I don't, are we expecting any coffee?
I know, I was
Tea
just
or
thinking
anything?
maybe the coffee.
I recommend having,
I can
Adele
run up.
recommend having something to drink.
Yeah, something.
Chris.
Schedule much. Yeah. So, no, sorry, there's just been so many orders and it's really.
I know. Oh, thank you. I know, we need some drinks.
We could always
or-
go to the bathroom, right, and get a coffee there.
Yeah, there's only one coffee pot though, that's the only.
Let's hope it's full.
Oh. Useful.
Normally happens is I've done it twice and come back.
Yeah.
Sigmar, I might run off and get both of
I
them
was just
a
checking
coffee.
what the situation, apparently 11:15 is when it's coming, very helpful.
Ah.
And it's coming with the food by the looks of it. So,
And
great.
water or no water?
We had meetings, quite has more than what we do.
We can just
I
go to
could
the
have-
charging station, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shall we go for a coffee there?
Yeah, let's do that.
To be honest, what they're probably going
I
to bring
know,
is
coffee.
instant coffee. So
No, in the bank.
Have a break and
Proper coffee or what we got actually.
yeah,
Like
a bit of
that.
yeah. Tea bags.
Usually they get basically what Polish people don't drink and they make the coffee for us. Huh? Well, you know that we had the workshop for the elephant for the last week. Yeah. And so it was scheduled for last Thursday. So on Friday, we said we need some food. And they said no. No, it's too late. It's a week. No, we should have known earlier than that. No.
Well, to be honest, you ordered Domino's pizza.
Then we ordered, then we said, okay, can we have some pizza? Oh yeah, line 3, it's £14 per pizza.
What?
And I said, Domino's gives us a large pizza for 12.
So you just went to Domino's?
Of course, yeah, let's go for Domino's at this point.
Ah, so that's when you ate the Domino's
Yeah.
pizza. It's all
Yeah.
coming together now.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it was working cheaper. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Externally.
Yeah, it's crazy, exactly. So you basically are paying outside, so instead of paying yourself and getting some money out of it,
It's-
paying with the university. No.
It's actually worse than that, because even when they can cater, they can't cater to the times you decide.
Yeah.
So if we wanted at 9:50 today.
I said, yeah, so you didn't get the coffee this morning?
No,
Oh,
It was on the things, coffee and.
yeah, it was coffee and meatballs at night.
that was the plan.
And they say, oh no, we'll do it when we want.
Yeah, so 11:15.
To be honest, quite a few people go to central like caterers in town to bring it because the math department quite often get things from sandwich companies in town because they're better and
Yeah, right.
Okay, let's do that from now on.
Next time. But then you need to go and pick them up.
yeah, some of them do it.
We leave our stuff here, yeah.
I'm not leaving.
You really?
No, because they've seen that you have.
If there's more expensive things there, they're not going to steal yours, are they? As long as they park next to the really shiny.
Oh, yeah, of course, I won't.
Online people, Tagreed and Abdul Rahman, just to say we'll be back in 10 minutes. We're just getting some tea and coffee because it's not been delivered into the room.
Do we have, I don't have the keys. Ah, all right, yes, yeah, we didn't have time to talk yesterday. It was interesting, that's a.
I don't have a lot. I mean, I know I could join online, but that's not nice. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's. We forget some. And we. I wonder if we do.
Because we don't understand exactly what he did there.
Yeah, I wonder.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I.
That is the view, there's something there.
I have to start.
Kind of.
I know.
The standard, that's the standard bursary, £1,000 for like. The application is literally to click. Yes, I would like this money. You don't have to write why. Just go for it. Yes, I think it was, I'll have to send it to you, yes. I remember. I think it's at 3 a.m. To be like that working, yeah.
3 a.m.
3 a.m.
Presentation.
And then I had to rush through during the meeting because I did a mistake in downloading the mark from, and I was starting to say, oh, it's the mark, we don't understand the mark. No, I didn't.
That's one to one, but you just the more.
Yes. No,
Yeah, it's not pressure, but just like.
Yeah, this is the.
No, it's
Yeah, so she probably knows.
No, I should put it in the pressure.
he left to find the last.
I can try,
bit and then-
let me try some there anyway.
Just a question. If not, no. To talk about, to be honest. Don't worry, don't worry. I just need to get my keys and let's get the office. And then.
And I'm also up for the open day this weekend. I mean, now, I was basically.
No, the thing is, you know what happened? So I was away that
On Saturday.
and I learned this week because I know I had.
No, I do.
Like, this was one of the reasons that I'm here. Yeah. And plus, like, yeah, there are like the.
Can I leave you in Juliana's and because I'm gonna go.
Covering like.
Of course.
It's not something expensive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. As I said, I can try with Danny. But somehow. You can't do July. It comes with July. We can't swap, they're all fully booked. Those are all postdoc. And Lorena, like, they're all like, I'm supposed to be finishing their postdoc. So I can't really.
I have a.
Yeah.
I said I have to sign it, I have to put it in the fridge straight away.
I see.
So I have to be as well. So I can't, and I don't know what time they're coming.
See.
So I won't be able, unless they come at 9 a.m., then I'll just come here, but I doubt it.
Yeah, the thing is, I doubt that any of them can do the presentation tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even like if you do a 5-minute presentation, I need to ask, Steve for sure can change,
I wouldn't be able to get something.
Veronica as well.
And I can't actually, I have a day to.
That's all right, I'll just.
Oh, Gavin. A quick learner, I think, I mean, if he has it ready, I would be able to, that's the problem, isn't it?
Okay, so it's quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so people.
I mean,
I
don't know which day, but it got me 15, 16 or 17, so.
Okay.
Again, that is a.
Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, so yeah, we have a narrow window then.
Let's leave it for next time. I will have no medical stuff.
Yeah. It's so busy. Struggling to It's all social.
managed all the time, the thing, yeah, that's been. I'm often, few kind of late this week, every single day.
It's like, I have 26 emails replying. It's just like 10:30. Leave me alone. Like urgent, because next week I'm off. And the following week we have a big meeting with like some partners and a call. Like,
Like out here.
Yeah, the one. Unless, all the way in the corridor on the, it's next to the final entrance. Yeah, yeah.
That's right. And then there was one.
There are lots of it,
Yeah.
so but I think the distances are probably the same. It's just the one you prefer to go
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
How did you sleep well, Adele?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. No issues with time difference.
I always bring the sleeping pill with me. And I have my dosage, like I know exactly,
Yeah.
How much?
Never.
yeah.
I
then
never
go to
do
sleep,
that, so
yeah.
I'm like a zombie.
Yeah, no, because I travel
Quite a lot.
frequently, yeah, and it's always to Europe or somewhere else.
Yeah.
So without that, I would just. Yeah.
No, I know, because I am, when there's a big gap.
It's 5,
Fine.
yeah, which isn't bad for me. Last month I was in Latvia and I was 7.
I had a problem when I went to Japan. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I simply could not sleep. I was sleeping 1 more hour every single day that had passed. So
Yeah.
it was a day and a half. And then one day, I think the second day, I went sightseeing and I had to go back to the hotel because
Yeah.
it's so dizzy and I'm gonna collapse myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that movie Lost in Translation
Yeah.
in Japan, you know.
Yeah.
It's like-
Exactly.
yeah. I love Japan, so I love it.
I love it to bits. I want to go back.
Where'd you go?
We went to Tokyo and a little bit, so Kamakura, but not much further than that. But my husband at the time he was working for finance. So they
Nice.
Yeah. Wow. So they took us to these amazing places.
Yeah.
It was so lucky because he was going his own for work and I said, you're gonna take me.
Yeah,
I
something
don't
like
care.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
awesome.
don't care.
What did he do for time out?
He works with, they call it, he's a project director, so it's all about, digital products.
Okay.
And working with, interface with clients, but yeah, he left a long time ago
Okay,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's still the
That's cool.
same area,
Yeah.
working the same digital products and things, so nothing related to academy, so he tends to do lots of fun stuff.
Yeah.
Because of media and
Yeah,
entertainment.
a
Yeah,
fun job.
yeah, exactly.
My husband does international anti-corruption, so it's no fun.
But does he get to travel a lot?
Now he's traveling, yeah, but I mean, it's to like places I don't want to go, yeah.
Oh,
Okay, hi, Val. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
I'm Valeria.
I'm Val. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, but yeah, that trip to Japan stayed, in my memory. It was so cool.
Yeah.
We even went through a earthquake once there. I know.
What?
I thought I was going to die on my own. He was out for work, and then we were going this, that crossing in Tokyo. That we were in the hotel in front of that
my
crossing.
goodness.
We were at the 18th floor.
Shibuya Crossing.
Yes. So we were at the 18th floor, our room, but he was out for work in an exhibition, and art exhibition. He was at the 51st floor, and when the earthquake started, I was then that time managed to have a nap, and then I woke up with
Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
and then I went to the window. I'm gonna die alone in this hotel room in Japan. And then he said he was in this exhibition and people start panicking and then they said sit on the floor because then the sensation is less intense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
meanwhile, you're standing in the window.
Yeah, exactly. Me, the other way around. I went to the window, yeah.
I've never experienced an earthquake.
So yeah, I mean, me
Yeah.
in my life, and then I go to Japan, and then that's it for me now. My first and last.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny afterwards, but it wasn't a very small one actually. It was quite a reasonable one, and they had one prior to that one that was quite catastrophic. So everybody was on alert
Yeah.
mode. But yeah, it was looking back now. Yeah. Made the trip memorable.
Yeah,
isn't
we
it?
won't forget that.
Yeah.
They had an earthquake in New York a few March, like unheard of earthquake in New York. Yeah,
Was it just?
it was a mild one, so there wasn't like anything, but people were like, "Oh my goodness, what is this?" Because they've not
Yeah.
experienced that before. Yeah,
I know it's very strange.
Yeah.
And I think because Japan is well prepared and all the buildings have like
Yeah.
joints and things, so you sway
With
with
it.
but the thing shriek as well.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
and this is why in the boat, like,
Yeah.
you get very dizzy because it was quite. And it lasted for a while. There was, and first of all, I thought I was dreaming because I was sleeping. I couldn't place what was going on. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then I couldn't, I don't know if I could call Peter at the time. I think he called me to see if everything was okay. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
He was,
In Syria, yes, and then in Peru as well.
really, so
I woke up and I went out and it was like no one else trying to talk, but then the next day I was like putting people that I think I'm quite sensitive to infected even in Bali one happened a couple of years ago. Actually not the 4 or 5 years
yeah,
ago.
I think I remember.
I felt it and no one else felt it. I'm like, there wasn't an earthquake. I'm like, no, there isn't. I'm like, there isn't an earthquake. And then I looked up and there wasn't an earthquake.
Yeah.
You know, so in Peru, it was quite a strong one because there were cracks in the. I think it's just the plaster that.
Yeah,
but there were
yeah.
cracks. Nobody felt it, but I thought that 4 a.m. and I went out and I was standing there like waiting for people to go. I know what's going on, but I'm too scared to go back in because I saw the crack. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was my feeling because I'm like, I'm locked in this room because I don't want to go outside. You know what's gonna happen. So yeah,
No, we had like a growing up then too.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's very.
We've got external visitors, please supply some water. Oh,
The water.
the water.
Where is the water?
Yeah, so we are getting water. Good news. Bad news, it can only come at 11:15.
Yesterday.
It's a recurring thing. It's a recurring thing. It's a recurring theme. I don't know what we can do about it because every time it happens.
No, I just,
You're welcome. It was fun. You want?
Can I get it next to the
Thank you. If anybody wants.
I'll
Yeah.
just place it over here.
We have to ramble at some point, don't we?
my husband, to be honest. I think usually. But I get this because it's too many. Like Colin? Yeah. Like I don't have it anymore. Yeah, he's speaking Italian. What if it's Alan Arlen's here? Yes, maybe. There you go. There you go. Do you want to? I just trying to do an article. In Florence. Like a camel. Look at that. I just went to a Florence. Yeah. Wow. Tell yourself to me.
It's water, actually.
Yeah. Water retention. Loved it. I was good every evening. You, yeah, so exciting to see like using the research yeah.
Right.
Sycamore, there's water now, if you would like some.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just explaining to Aaron that the water problem is entirely of my own construction. As I said, members should bring their own water so that we don't have to cater to this plastic stuff. But then that doesn't apply if we got external visitors. You know, we're not asking external visitors.
Because we need to make the new bottle.
Yes, we need to make our own glass. Our own bottle.
We could do that.
I don't know. You know it's a good idea.
No.
Yeah.
And you then just make sure you're wearing your.
With the new logo.
Yes.
Yeah.
The gears.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
I still have mine.
Interesting. Yeah. Ah, okay, no, that's why it's in the big.
These are horrid.
No, okay.
The water.
This.
I mean, if it turns into something, somebody might reach out to you at some point, but.
Like a little cowbell. Like a little cowbell.
Oh.
Yeah. No, the microphone is just like, oh. Okay, should we get started?
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started so we can finish. I'm Adele, I'm the Global South Chair. In my presentation today, no, okay, there we go. I will first give you some background on myself, my research areas and some policy highlights. I'll tell you a bit about the Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Research Center, or the CAR Center at University of the Bahamas. I'll talk a bit about the IPCC, and then about the NRDC, and we'll get into all of those acronyms. So first, research and policy highlights. I have a broad research and policy development background. My main affiliations have been with the University of the Bahamas. I started there as an assistant professor in 2012, and I did that teaching for 5 years. I did not enjoy it so much. And so I, in 2017, went to Climate Analytics, which is a think tank based in Berlin, as a senior scientist, and I'll talk some about the work that I did there. But I have maintained an affiliation with the University of the Bahamas as a visiting researcher from 2017 to 2019. And then I founded the CAR Center in 2019, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then I did not enjoy being a director, so I went back to being a senior fellow, and I'm that until now. I stayed with Climate Analytics for 7 years, and just last month, I've joined the Natural Resources Defense Council, where I am their adaptation lead, and we'll talk about that as well. I don't know why this has like separate, why it's not showing the research part. There we go. My research, I am a human geographer. My work focuses on climate change adaptation and loss and damage as pillars of climate action So often when people think of climate action, they only think of mitigation. For a lot of countries in the global south, particularly small island developing states or SIDS, adaptation, which is what we do to lessen those impacts of climate change and loss and damage. So responding to the negative impacts of climate change are equally, if not more important. And so my work has really focused on elevating those as pillars of climate action. I use a lot of qualitative approaches, interviews, focus group surveys. I do some GIS. I am a geographer, although I haven't used it in a while. And a lot of my research has been policy focused. So looking at international policy, how that relates to what's going on regionally and at the national level in the Caribbean in particular. I do have some affiliation with engineering and architecture. So my bachelor's is in civil engineering. I worked with industry as a construction project manager for Target Corporation. So I actually was building new Target stores, if you're familiar with Target in the US. So I'm quite familiar with the building cycle from the industry, but I left that behind. And I picked geography because geography was just so broad and I felt like I could expand my research interest over time. And so you'll see that I've been involved in lots of different things. So my dissertation, I put this in here at the last minute because I saw that Ariel talked about his dissertation. So my dissertation was on an integrated view, multiple stressors and small tourism enterprises in the Bahamas. And so here I brought together the concept of looking at the particular challenges of small island developing states, which are a group of developing countries that are small islands. They share similar challenges, such as having small economies of scale, being isolated from other markets, facing challenges with finances for development. I looked at different factors of environmental change, so climate change, extreme events, and how land was being used, and also intersected this with globalization stressors, such as mass tourism, sustainable tourism, and financial crises. And I did this looking at small tourism enterprises, so small locally owned hotels in particular, and looked at the challenges that they were facing in trying to be part of tourism, which is our, in the Bahamas, major sector, but which locals find it very hard to make any money from because we have these huge, large hotels that come in that are externally owned. They take all of the capital out of the country, and locals are often just left, you know, at a very base level of development. That's me when I used to have dreadlocks. This was some of my GIS work that I did. What people found very interesting, people love maps. So this is the island of New Providence, and the dots, the green dots, are actually where you can publicly access the beach. Most of the beach is not publicly accessible, although by law, all of the beach is supposed to be publicly accessible. And so I looked into issues around that and how it affected locals being able to partake in the tourism economy. So since then, I have expanded my work into three main areas. The first is looking at adaptation and constraints and limits to adaptation. So adaptation is critical in order to reduce the impacts of climate change, but adaptive capacity is neither boundless nor evenly spread. So that just means that we can adapt to climate change, but there are limits into how much we can adapt. And that counts for humans and it counts for nature as well. So in some of this work I've been doing, I've worked with climate modelers that look at how different aspects of the economy may change over time and how this may affect adaptation. I've looked at adaptation constraints in the Caribbean in particular to highlight the importance of finance. So if there is no money that's provided to adapt, then there's simply not much that you can do. I did a big study that looked at global evidence of constraints and limits to human adaptation. So in that study with 20 other people from around the world, we looked at over 1,600 case studies of adaptation to pull out information about what was actually limiting adaptation. And I've done, other work on this, looking at insurance as a particular adaptation strategy and the limitations of insurance as it becomes too expensive and no longer offered. And so it's not something that we can fall back as an adaptation strategy. So that's been a major theme of my work, is this adaptation, constraints, and limits. The next broad area of my research is focused on loss and damage and climate mobilities. So loss and damage, the negative impacts of climate change are already occurring and are projected to escalate. So people often think of climate change as something that's going to happen
Feel free to roll it in. Sorry, Darlene, carry on.
I shall. So, in looking at loss and damage, I've looked at it from the perspective of what's going on with the international climate change negotiations, where loss and damage has been one of the most contentious topics there. And looking at how international policy or lack thereof on loss and damage has translated into a lack of action at national and subnational scales in addressing the negative impacts of climate change, and how this has affected sustainable development, particularly in the small island context. So I've done a number of publications on that. Understanding the politics and governance of climate change, loss and damage is a good piece that provides an overview of how there's been this tendency to try and ignore that the impacts of climate change are already happening, to reduce funding for it, and how it has affected sustainable development in the developing world context. And then the third major area of my research has focused on climate justice. And climate justice is the concept that countries and communities that have contributed the least to the drivers of climate change are disproportionately affected, and they are often least supported to respond to those impacts of climate change. And so here, the most recent piece I've done is on climate justice and loss and damage, which links together two different strands of my research, and looked at Hurricane Dorian, Haitians, and human rights in the Bahamas. So the Haitians are an immigrant population in the Bahamas, and this piece just explored how during Hurricane Dorian, which was the worst hurricane that we had ever experienced, resulted in huge infractions to the human rights of that Haitian population, and how duplicitous it was for the Bahamas as a small island developing state to be at international climate negotiations talking about loss and damage as a developing country, but yet within the country is inflicting these same injustices upon communities. And so a lot of my work has really been to bring some of these issues to the fore, to connect what's going on at local and national scales to what's going on internationally. And then moving on to some of the public projects in the Bahamas that I've done in climate change. So being a researcher in a small island, you get involved in lots of different things. So I was leading the climate change initiative and focusing on public education and outreach. When I moved back to the Bahamas in 2012, I found that there was very low climate literacy, low understanding of climate change. People were still climate deniers and thinking that climate change didn't exist, which was appalling to me. And so we did a number of public outreach. We did Hootief Makunk, which was a comic book for children so that they could relate climate change to what's happening to them in their own communities. And we found throughout the region that there's this need to translate this international rhetoric around climate change into things that people can understand and relate to. I've also been involved in long-term development planning in the Bahamas, largely focusing on stakeholder engagements and making that link between science and policy. I've done this at the national scale for the Bahamas and in 2 islands in the Bahamas that are developing. This picture up here is actually a huge mound of salt. So the Bahamas is an archipelago. There are 700 islands and keys. About 20 of them are inhabited. And this is on the island of Inagua, where they actually produce salt, that Morton salt, if you know Morton salt. actually exports. So it's one of the few industry that we have in the country. Okay. And being in a small community, so I'm a climate change adaptation and loss and damage expert, but you get pulled into anything having to do with the environment. So I've done projects working on the International Maritime Organization, or IMO, ballast water, which is water that the ships use to balance themselves and they let it off. So thinking about how this carries pathogens and how we can mitigate that in the Bahamas context. The Bahamas is actually one of the top 3 countries in the world that license ships. And so this was a big deal for us. I've done work with the Global Environment Fund Small Grants Program, so coming up with a strategy for the Bahamas as to how it would allocate those funds to environmental organizations. The Nagoya Protocol for Access and Benefit Sharing, which is an international protocol that looks at how information and research is collected from developing countries and make sure that, you know, researchers from developed countries that go to developing countries and collect sensitive information are sharing the benefits of that with those countries. So you can think of pharmaceutical countries that come to the developing world, find some plant that's really good for some medicinal use, take that and never share any of the benefits. And so this is an international protocol that attempts to deal with that. And I've been involved in that. And then probably like the most out of my field has been work for the Inter-American Development Bank, where I did a report on prisoners. So people love maps, and I, did some mapping for them to show like where prisoners were coming from in certain parts of the island, and they were highly concentrated in the very urban and poorer areas, as you can imagine, but it helped people to understand that there are nuances even within a small island. I've also been I found very busy. I've also been quite active in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, so the UNFCCC. The first COP that I attended was in 2015 with the Paris Agreement, and I cried at that COP to see that this is how this huge challenge of climate change was being attacked or not dealt with, and just the bureaucracy involved in that. So I've been going to them since then and following the issues of adaptation, of loss and damage, and also on finance, which are huge issues for the developing world context. I've been a scientific advisor for the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, and helping them to craft their arguments using science as an underpinning. I've been a member of the Technology Executive Committee, where I've played the role of a policymaker, and so have gotten to see, people coming with their research and trying to see how that translates into policy at the international scale. So it's given me a really good understanding of like how to frame research in a way that resonates with policymakers. And I'm currently an expert group on the comprehensive risk management that looks at how we respond to climate change impacts. And then one of the projects in particular that I wanted to talk about was this impact project. And it was from 2016 to 2022. And this was during my time at Climate Analytics. And it was a huge regional project that looked to improve the capacity of small island developing states and least developed countries to plan and implement science-based climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies at a number of levels. It aimed to improve access to international climate finance, which is so important to allow these countries to actually implement adaptation and mitigation measures. And it also aimed to improve the participation and influence of SIDS and LDC negotiators at the international scales, where their voices are so important, but where they're often not equipped to participate. And so this was an incredibly fulfilling project. I got to work directly with people from a lot of different countries throughout the Caribbean, but also in the Pacific Ocean and in Africa, improving all of these different capacities. And and really seeing how to frame science in a way that it's useful to policymakers, that they can understand it and then use it to advance, development goals. And this was supported by the German Federal Ministry. And this is very small, but I just wanted to say I've done a lot of direct government support, particularly in the Caribbean, working with countries throughout the region to improve their capacities for delivery of climate change investment projects, to develop gender responsive budgeted project proposals, to update their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, which is what countries submit to the UNFCCC to say how much they're planning to reduce their emissions, capacity development to engage with the Green Climate Fund. So a lot of work working with governments, again, to improve this connection between national and international. Okay. It shows up after a while. All right, so moving on. University of the Bahamas, the Carr Center. This is our logo. This was given to us. We did not have any input into this at all. We had volunteers from graphic designers that wanted to do like a cool logo because they were very excited, but the university had its own branding. And so we basically had the University of Bahamas logo with just us on the side.
They tried that here, we just ignored them.
Good. Yes. I should take that approach. So the Carr Center was established in 2019 in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. So Hurricane Dorian was the most intense storm to ever affect the Bahamas. It affected the second and third most populated islands of the Bahamas, which is a huge deal. In the past, hurricanes had largely affected some of the less populated islands, but this really exposed that the Bahamas was not prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change. Hundreds of people died. A lot of people were missing for a long time. People were stranded on the islands without any access to food or water or electricity for days while the government tried to figure out what to do. And so it was a big wake-up call for the Bahamas that we need to do something. And so the university, after ignoring me since 2012 about we need to do something on climate change, said, okay, we need to do something on climate change. So we developed this center. We found that there was much research on the global scale about climate change, but that there was not much that focused on SIDS in particular. There was also limited research coming from people in the Caribbean. So it was a lot of people, like external researchers doing work on the Caribbean, but not, local researchers. There are other institutions in the Caribbean that focus on climate change, but that were coming at it from a different perspective. And so there was really this niche area to look at the human dimensions of climate change and what it means for people and how to address it. So the approach that we took was to be an autonomous center, but working collaboratively with other institutions at the university. So the Government and Public Policy Institute, there was a Gerace Research Institute that was on another island that looked at more like natural science. The Oral History Institute, that was very important, that collected, perspectives of people. The Bahamas Environmental Research Center, which I'm still not sure what they do. And the Small Island Sustainability Research Complex, which looked at sustainable development more broadly. And we were also to collaborate with regional and international climate change research centers. So really trying to make a mark as the Carr Center that's focused on climate change. Our vision is to support SIDS across the globe in addressing the human dimensions of climate change to ensure climate resilient futures. The mission is to conduct research, policy engagement, education, and outreach to provide high quality and evidence-based support for communities, governmental and NGOs, and the private sector to prepare for the risks presented by climate change. And we have 3 pillars, which I will go through briefly. The first pillar is research. There we go. So to conduct high quality research on climate change adaptation, what I've already talked about, loss and damage, which I've already talked about, and comprehensive disaster risk management, which is something that is desperately needed in the region, to produce and present academic publications, policy briefs, case studies, and reports. And we found that there was a real desire for like these policy briefs that people could start using to put into action. And then also to coordinate with research projects on climate change in the Bahamas that are conducted by external researchers, so people coming from outside of the country, to make sure that Bahamians benefit from that. The second pillar was a real focus on policy engagement. So recognizing that there's a need for action and not just research, supporting the development of policies, plans, strategies, and projects, serving on relevant national and international committees, and serving as a nonpartisan resource for governments for the negotiations. And so even though we are a small center, we have to do quite a lot. And then education and outreach is the final pillar. And here, hosting public fora to really increase that engagement and understanding of climate change is something that affects people now. Maintaining an online presence and engaging and collaborating with a broad range of international organizations. So quite a large task for a small center, but as I said, when you are in a small context and it's a very pressing issue, then there's lots that needs to be done. So I'll just highlight two of the projects that we've done so far. The first was I Survived Dorian. And so coming out of Dorian, we needed to do something on Dorian. And so this was really a platform for the survivors of the hurricane to share their experiences and to share how they thought that disaster preparedness and response could be improved. We did this through collecting oral histories, so speaking directly with people that went through the storm, getting their perceptions of climate change risks. And this was funded by Open Society Foundations. And we produced a really nice documentary that sort of highlighted some of the major challenges that people experience. One of the things that was really prevalent was trauma, and people, you know, being deeply affected by going through that storm, even being afraid, like when it would rain again, that something bad was going to happen. And so we put the findings together in a policy brief to help the government that deals with disaster response to be able to deal with some of these things that they hadn't thought about. Another project that we did was on internally displaced people. So we assessed the collection and use of data on IDPs that were forced from their home as a result of Dorian. We did a lit review and interviews, and this was funded by the British High Commission in the Nassau, so yeah, UK. And we found that there was no systematic collection of data. There were people, this is why there were hundreds of people that were missing, because there was just nothing. And so people thought that family members were dead, when in fact they were not, and it caused lots of undue trauma and stress. And so we came up with recommendations as to how this could be improved, drawing from international best practices. So that's sort of what we've been doing at the Carr Center. I will say, we launched in 2019, and then in 2020, COVID happened, right? And so that immediately had an effect on how we operated, on how we could get funding. So the university moves from providing funding for the center to providing funding to actually move to an online environment. And so that has affected the funding for the center. We have had successive changes in presidents at the university. So we're on our third president since we started in 2019, which, as you can imagine, is very disruptive. And then there are challenges in funding with general in developing countries. So it's great, you know, Harold was talking about these multi-million grants and things that you guys have access to, but in the Bahamas, there is no funding for research. So you either have to find some international fund or find some philanthropy, but there's no source for you to actually have a sustained research program. So it's a very difficult operating environment, which is true in many developing countries. All right, moving along to the IPCC. So, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I'm sure you're all aware of, the leading international body for the assessment of climate change. We do not conduct new research, but rather we review and assess the latest scientific information. We are tasked with assessing the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic information relevant to understanding the scientific basis of climate change. Importantly, we should be neutral with respect to policy. So we're not supposed to be policy prescriptive, but policy relevant. Since our start in 1988, we have had 6 assessment cycles. So we just finished up the last 6 assessment cycle, AR6, last year, and AR7 started in 2023. So we are at the beginning of a new cycle, and the cycles last for about 7 years. Okay, the IPCC is structured into 3 main working groups. Working group 1 is the physical science basis. So that looks at like how climate change affects different, or how climate change is affecting the atmosphere, the oceans, the physical science. Working group 2 looks at impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, and that's for both human and natural systems. Working group 3 looks at mitigation of climate change, so very much focused on the emissions and how to reduce those and where we're at. And then there's also the task force on national greenhouse gas inventories, which provides methodologies for countries to calculate their emissions. So those are the 3 working groups and the task force. Contributing to the development of those are authors, contributors, and reviewers. So the authors come from all around the world, as do the other contributors and reviewers. Above the working groups is the executive committee and the bureau of the IPCC, which are members that are elected. The bureau and the executive committee provide guidance for the whole process. And it's 34 of us that are on the bureau. And then the IPCC plenary is actually all 195 countries that are part of the IPCC. So it is a huge structure, and it is always a miracle to me that we end up with reports at the end of the cycle. So my experience with the IPCC, most recently I was elected to be on the bureau for this AR7. So I'm vice chair in working group 2, focusing on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. In AR6, I was a lead author working on the impacts of 1.5, and I focused on impacts for SIDS there. I was also a lead author looking at key risks across sectors and regions, where I focused on adaptation limits, looked at risks for cities and settlements by the sea, and also the summary for policymakers, and then the synthesis report, which is a synthesis of all of the 3 reports. And in the 5th assessment cycle, I was also contributing author looking at adaptation there as well. So I thought I'd give you 3 main areas from AR6 that I think will be picked up and be very important in AR7. Again, focusing on working group 2, which is where I stand. So the first is constraints and limits to adaptation. So in AR6, we moved from like this theoretical understanding of what could possibly constrain or limit adaptation into a much more targeted assessment of what's actually happening. So we did this big study, evidence on constraints and limits to adaptation by region and by sector. So we had 7 or 8 different sectors and the different regions. The darker color is where we had more evidence of constraints and limits. And so you can see in small island states, there's lots of evidence on there being limits for cities, settlements, and key infrastructure. And you can see that there's less evidence for limits in water and terrestrial fresh ecosystems in Australasia. So this really allowed us to see like what is the evidence showing us about where limits and constraints to adaptation are being experienced. And this was drawn again from those over 1,600 case studies of adaptation. We also did constraints. So looking at different constraints associated with limits by region and sector. So we divide constraints into 8 different categories, from economic constraints, social, cultural, human capacity, etc. And here again, we did this mapping, looking at what the largest constraints were for different sectors by region. So digging deeper into what's going on, you can see that lots of gray cells, which just means that there's insufficient data. So this points to huge research gaps into what we know about the ability of adaptation. The next key area that I think we'll be picking up in AR7 is on loss and damage. So we've done some work looking at what are the policy options to respond to loss and damage, which are those negative impacts of climate change, looking at things such as transformational adaptation that's needed, livelihood transformation, which we talked about a bit yesterday, migration and retreats, and sort of like looking at what are options available to us as the impacts of climate change escalate. And we also in AR6 did work looking at the impacts of climate change on ecosystems and on human systems. And you can see in the gray areas, there's just lots of things that we don't know. And so we need to know more about this to inform then how we respond. So I think that this is something that's going to be picked up in the next assessment report. And then finally, the third area that I think is going to be huge is going to be this climate resilient development, which really links together adaptation and mitigation with the idea of deep systemic transformation. So what we're doing in AR7 is really trying to make those cross working group linkages. So between working group 2, which looks at adaptation, and working group 3, which looks at mitigation, and really bring those together through this climate resilient development framework. So it may be something for Renew to consider how to bring adaptation into. And this was one of the figures that we had in the summary for policymakers that showed that there's a rapidly narrowing window of opportunity to enable climate resilient development. And so choices that we make about community, sociocultural, political, ecological arenas of engagement can either lead us to a state of climate resiliency, or if we make bad decisions, can lead us to a place where there's more vulnerability, high poverty, ecosystem degradation, inequality, and injustice. And all of these figures that I'm showing you had to be approved by all of the member governments. So these have been like highly sanitized. But the fact that they could all agree that like bad decisions will lead us to an ever inequitable world was huge. And so I really think the climate resilient development is going to be a way for us to try and spur on climate action and really bring together mitigation and adaptation that are both needed. And I am speeding through because I'm almost done. Finally, the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and that is their logo. Yes. Natural, yes. Sorry, natural. Yes, this was done late. Natural resources, yes. So there we go. NRDC is a huge NGO in the USA. I was actually not familiar with them until I moved to the US. They are not very much known in the climate adaptation space, but they are known very well in other spaces, including Curb Your Enthusiasm. They combine the power of more than 3 million members and online activists with the expertise of over 700 scientists, lawyers, and other environmental specialists. Focusing on 3 main issues: the climate crisis, protecting wildlife, and ensuring the rights of all people to clean air, clean water, and healthy communities. And it's a very interesting model because they're mostly funded by these small donations from their 3 million members, which provide millions of dollars. They also get a lot of direct contributions from wealthy individuals. And they really play this role of providing political and lobbying to the US government to enact change. For climate adaptation, so far they've been focusing on the USA with some international work in India and China and with ECOWAS. So we are now in the process of developing a new climate adaptation strategy for NRDC. They really want to expand what they've been doing. And so now is a good time to think of potential connections and synergies. The initial areas that we are thinking of expanding is on climate mobility, which encompasses migration, planned relocation, displacement, and immobility. Immobility is people that cannot or do not want to move away from areas that are at risk. We do some existing domestic work there with the National Flood Insurance Program and with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency regulations. We do work on buyouts of at-risk homes and on flood disclosure, which is making sure that states allow for homeowners and renters to know if their property has been flooded multiple times, which then affects where people choose to buy and live. The second major area is on climate health, which looks at human health impacts from a range of different hazards. We are doing existing work on that, focusing on heat and occupational health, and also on water security. Internationally, we're doing work in India, focusing on heat action plans and with the National Emergency Agency in India. The third major area is on adaptation finance, which encompasses finance for adaptation both in the US and internationally. We do some domestic work there, looking at how the US government allocates money to assist communities to deal with recovering from emergencies, and green finance, which looks at how federal government money is allocated to at-risk communities. And in international work, we already do some work looking at international climate finance tracking and advocacy to increase the amount of finance. And then cross-cutting, all of these is measuring adaptation progress. So I will talk a bit about, assessing. And so we find the need to measure, what are we doing? Are we learning from that? So this would encompass monitoring, evaluation, and learning indicators and metrics, which are incredibly difficult to do for adaptation. And we do some existing domestic work there where we look at flood disclosure mapping. And that's it. Yes.
Jonathan, thank you.
Yeah.
The presentation was excellent. Thank you so much. So the adaptation finance in the NRDC, could that possibly be a source of finance to do pilots in the Bahamas, for example, or is it just has to be within the US?
For the adaptation finance, we're looking at advocating the US government to provide more money for adaptation, both domestically and internationally. So I don't know if we would could advocate for money for adaptation in terms of research, in terms of doing pilot projects and things like that. So that could be one aspect of it. Yeah.
No, I just thought that could be a possible source of finance potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
Microphone.
Just with my Renew hat on, has ideas around regenerative systems, regenerative design, has that sort of thing, is there any sort of discussion in the public discourse around these areas? When you talk about adaptation, one attitude to adaptation might well be, well, actually, we should adopt a regenerative systems approach because it is a sort of long-term investment in a sort of self-resilient system, which doesn't need constant intervention, and then sort of balancing humans with nature. So there's many elements of that distributed across those actions. I mean, I'm just thinking at the moment of the NRDC slide, the last couple of slides, but actually even stretching back into the work in the IPCC and all the rest of it. And I'm just trying to gain a sense of to what extent regenerative appears in this discourse, if at all. Maybe it isn't, because it wasn't reflected in what you
Yeah.
showed us. But are you hearing any murmurings, or is this a thing? It's not a thing.
It's not a thing in the communities that I'm in. So it was great to hear more about it here. I think there are parallels to it in the climate resilient development, right? So I think we use different terms to talk about similar things. So I think within the IPCC and the UNFCCC space, it's climate resilient development where this comes in, which would be bringing in regenerative design, combining that with adaptation that's needed in order to have this total resiliency package. And so the work that I do is like really broad and up here at the policy level, whereas you guys get really detailed into the actual building and community and neighborhood. But there's the definite link, I think, there through the climate resilient development.
Yeah, just to quickly follow up before I hand over to colleagues, it was very interesting to me, the climate resilient discussion that you brought up, and about the integration of mitigation and adaptation.
Yeah.
We've done some work on buildings. So in the UK, and as in Norway and many other European countries, there's a big focus on insulation within buildings to reduce heat loss and actually therefore reduce carbon emissions. But there's a growing discourse around actually that's making things worse for in terms of overheating. So actually, if you get a bad summer, there's a fear that a highly insulated building could actually be overheating catastrophically. So whilst you solve one problem, you've created this other problem, and therefore this adaptation has kind of been failed. Effectively, you've done a mitigation action, but it's actually failed you in terms of adaptation. And the work we showed was, if you're careful about the design, you can solve both things at the same time. So the insulation actually protects you from overheating, provided the building wasn't going to overheat anyway. So if you put a lot of glazing in the building, it's going to overheat whether or not there's insulation. That was kind of the key message that we drew out. It was a very complex piece of work, and it took I think about 4 years for a PhD student to finally work it out. So I think that's really close to my heart, and a lot of the work we are suggesting, for example, in India, we wrote a design manual. What we're saying is, well, actually mitigatory actions are part of your adaptation actions, but it needs to be well considered. You know, if you kind of go in blindly, you could be making things worse. I mean, there's been narratives around ventilation issues and things like this, but there's this lack of integrated thinking that actually a single action can give you long-term resilience.
That speaks to the need to bring together mitigation and adaptation, and to think about how these things interact. And in adaptation, we have a term, maladaptation, which is also big and huge now, and thinking about how you can adapt in a way that's actually not improving your resilience at all. So my personal crusade, and with IPCC, is like to break down these silos of mitigation over here and adaptation over here, and to look at how we bring them together at all scales in order to deal with climate change.
Yeah. Ah, yes. There.
Thank you, Adele. It was amazing. I learned so much. Yeah, very impressed. I don't know how you do all these jobs, honestly. I'm like, oh my God, does she have a life? Anyway, but that's amazing. Credit to you. I was just wondering, because I'm really interested in policy, as I mentioned yesterday, and because when I think about adaptation and mitigation, I think more about something of immediate need. So when I think about regenerative, I'm thinking about the future. So establishing that adaptation, mitigation, getting things ready for self-sufficiency. And that's how I see regenerative. So I'm wondering whether there is room, or do you think that, you know, we could interact more in that sense, so we can take the regenerative language or meaning, you know, towards, you know, communication with IPCC and even between us, actually, how we get regenerative to be, you know, more into the policy stream, so we can actually disseminate this further. Do you think that there is a path towards that? Do you think it's maybe something
Yeah.
we could work together in that sense? Sorry, I've been quite open and not even, not during, we say something in Portuguese that won't translate well here. But anyway, so I haven't, cut any corner. I just went straight
Yeah.
in.
That's good. That's how I communicate.
Okay,
well.
good.
Absolutely. But adaptation is looked at as like long-term planning. So not just what we do now. What we do now is sort of like responding to impacts, which is loss and damage. But adaptation is looked at as like longer-term planning. And in fact, the narrative around adaptation is we need to start planning adaptation now because the time scales are so long to actually implement it. So I think there's absolutely space to bring in that regenerative, thinking. And there's probably more concepts that can be linked. We're just talking about it in different ways.
Yeah.
So happy to help there with like translating what are we thinking about into things that resonate with what's existing at policy, what policymakers already understand, because they need that link. Oh, this is linked to this. I get it.
Yeah. So, and as you know, we are producing our manifesto. So I think if I don't know, Sukma, I'm jumping. I hope I'm jumping the gun here. But if you could read and give us your feedback or where you think there are gaps there, that what we are bringing is definitely something that to create that link or strengthen things that already exist. So that, from your knowledge and then your perspective into this, would be, I think, brilliant.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Please.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, first, thanks for the talk. It was a great talk. I was just wondering, because you kind of have this these three different areas you talked about of the NRDC and then the IPCC, well, and also maybe let's talk about, but you're obviously your own academic research that you did before that and everything. And I just wondered how you saw the link between kind of interacting with policy and also kind of the impact of your work and how much of a change you're able to make in different settings. Obviously, from the IPCC, from where you were saying, it's not our job to be prescriptive, we're more informing, and then the NRDC, which is directly lobbying, and then kind of academics who are not even necessarily, they have to disseminate the research then out to the policymakers. It's not even going out to them by default necessarily or being as noticed. Kind of, yeah, just what your thoughts on that, and how, as people that are a part of this group like Renew and are obviously interested in doing what we can for the climate, what we can do to best increase the impact of our research.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my work, I have always like seen climate change as the climate crisis and like as something that we very urgently need to deal with. And so all of my work has really been focused on really pressing issues. It's why I got involved with like working directly with governments to get research in front of them. It's really shaped how I do my research to make it as policy relevant as possible. In my experiences with the UNFCCC, which is why I cried at that first one, is like seeing how slow that things happen and like how deliberate it is to slow down action. So that's incredibly depressing, but you can like use it as motivation to keep doing more. The IPCC is incredibly frustrating to not be policy prescriptive. And we have a lot of scientists within the IPCC that say we should be more policy prescriptive, but our mandate is that we cannot. So we try, like if you see the reports, they've been getting ever and ever more pointed that we are not on the right track and we need to do something else. So I think, each of these things make a difference in different ways. And you like have to keep pushing forward in all of these different arenas. And it's why I made the change to NRDC now, is because I want to do like more advocacy and pushing and trying to see things happen after years of like feels like banging your head against the wall. So I will say, everything that we do matters. It's just how much, it's just when you see the impact, right? So either you can see it immediate impact or you may see it in decades or whenever else. But I would say that we all play a huge role in addressing the crisis.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say that was a good one to end on.
Oh,
I thought it was the end.
Sorry, but that was an amazing presentation. I am extremely impressed. I was wondering about one thing. The beginning of your research, you were doing a lot of research on the ground with people, and then you've reached policy making. How big do you think is the challenge bridging that gap between people on the ground and then policy making level? And is it big at all, or do you think that researchers have, been doing a good job linking that? And because now I think you're part of a lot of really big committees that do a lot of work, but you remember when you were with people. So is it a big gap, or do you think we're doing a good job? Well, you guys are doing a good job.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm doing a great job.
You
are. So
how
a lot
challenging is
yeah,
it?
it is challenging. So in the beginning, I really enjoyed, working directly with communities and doing that work. But I bring that experience now to this big level where they need to hear from people that have experience. And like me, myself, like I am personally affected by these things. Like my grandmother's house was completely decimated by Hurricane Dorian. My brother-in-law, they were in their attic during Dorian and hardly escaped, So I still have like these deep personal connections with what's happening on the ground that I maintain, even though I'm not doing research. And that really helps to motivate me, when I get into these platforms to talk about, okay, what really matters is people that are being affected by this now, and try to keep that urgency up rather than getting, caught up in this bureaucracy where they can make it seem so abstract and that there's no urgency needed at all. So I would say, like, you keep that connection to what had motivated you in the first place to keep that fire and that advocacy going. Yeah.
Get between people and lunch. I'll try and keep it brief. I mean, yeah, it's really interesting and great to have you here, and there's so much to talk about. I just wondered if we could look a little bit deeper into kind of what Sukumar started to talk about, kind of unintended consequences of mitigation of where they negatively affect adaptation. I think is really interesting. I'm wondering if there's any other examples. One that maybe comes to mind, because we're all talking so much about changing the way we do things, and that I'm just very aware of accidentally making mistakes. And I'm wondering if, the transition to the bioeconomy, which is big in construction, whether you have seen much discussion or evidence about how that might be setting ourselves up for a big risk in terms of, if bioresources are more susceptible to damage from trees for windfall or wildfires or disease outbreak, or whether we're encroaching on agricultural land. And I guess the food systems is such an important part of resilience. Do you think that do you think that's an example of where we might be like failing to see the bigger picture, or do you think there are any other obvious ones that people don't know about where we're potentially making mistakes with the right intentions?
Yeah, I think it speaks to the need to bring together these communities more to talk, because in adaptation, we talk about ecosystem-based adaptation and the potentials for ecosystem-based adaptation, but also the limits. So like as temperatures increase, as there are more climate impacts, like some of these things we're putting in place are just not going to work. So like restoring coral reefs, as ocean temperatures increase, they're going to die. So you put all of this money into doing that and it's not going to work. And so when you guys were talking about, I think, nature-based solutions or something yesterday, it immediately brought to me ecosystem-based adaptation, and we're already doing work thinking about that. The IPCC did do like these systems transitions and looked at links between adaptation and mitigation, and where there are either synergies or things that are of concern. And there's like a whole section on that, which we can look at. But there's already been some thinking on it, but there needs to do more to bring together these communities. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think, sorry, it's a comment, not a question. I think this other point that you just alluded to now was the other really striking thing from your presentation, to do with that there's a sort of capacity or a limit for certain actions. It's not boundless. And I think that is something, when we think about actions, we tend to think that, there's a mindset to society that problems given sufficient investment, energy, and effort can actually be solved. But actually, there will be a limit to the ability to solve these things, and the fact that it's not evenly distributed. So you said boundless and unevenly distributed, and I think these are really, really important things which we haven't considered as part of regenerative thinking, and we actually don't know to what extent this sort of thinking is constrained. I mean, in adaptation terms, you can think through the problem. The issue with regenerative is because it's a complex system. We actually, but there's something that we need to recognize, that it might be the case that there are limits. I mean, at 49.9 Celsius in New Delhi just 2 weeks ago, you're not going to be able to adapt. There is no adaptation. There is no refuge from this heat. And, the air conditioner is the only thing that can actually come to your rescue. And that's got all these other horrible consequences. So it's a sort of funny thing. We kind of think, oh, we can solve because that's our mindset. But actually, we mightn't be able to solve despite our best efforts, and sort of recognizing those limitations as part of this process is important.
I was just going to add towards adaptation, as you cited this example of 49 degrees. We also need to think about time scale, because for us to intervene and mitigate or adapt that, you need to think about when that's going to kick in, because we should have thought about 49 or doing something about 49 degrees maybe 20 years ago to reach what wouldn't be 49 today. So there is a time scale in which we need to consider to see the change and the things we are putting forward. So I just think that's not possible now, but might be possible in the future.
Yeah. Issue as a society. Strange dichotomy. Okay, I think we should let people eat. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You say that. Online people, we're going to take a break for an hour to eat lunch, but then there's an actual activity at the back end of that, and I would very much love for you to be a part of it if you're available, which is to do with the development of the logo for Renew, and we're going to try and involve Arnold and Adele in this process. And I just realized we haven't actually done a lot of spade work in organizing it, so we might have to organize it over lunch, but please stay on if you can. Okay, but maybe you can have a meal now while we eat. Cheers.
Thanks, Kamal.
No, exactly. Actually, over about in town. Yeah. Beh, solo Stefano e Rossolano. Yeah, makes more sense. But the point is, they only do these weekends. No, exactly. I don't know why. I thought it was the entire week. Then I was checking. I mean, they did Thursday morning. Oh no! I think I think there are a lot of synergies with what we're doing. Yeah, and it would be nice if we can have, at first, just with slides. Literally slides. In 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, probably. Also because it's good, I mean, it's not spicy. I think, and this is a general discussion. I would like them to present what we're doing to renew.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, because we need, I think, but there is time, I mean, for doing that. Because you're building the concept, so we need people also from bank.
Book it in.
How do we do that? I mean, is there like a slot we can have with the entire renewal? I don't know.
I mean, the problem with any activity, not everybody turns up.
Yeah, I know.
You just, so how long are you guys here? Till you never
Till the end of June.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. So
Yeah, that's what I'm
let's-
saying.
Let's find a good day, do it online, in person.
But
In person is better.
in person is better, but
This is great.
yeah, exactly, we didn't have to turn out, that's what we don't want.
We do hybrid.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, book it for next week or something.
I'll check.
Drop me an email.
Yeah, exactly, I'll check the URL next
Now
week.
drop me an email on two fronts. Or-
Oh, yes.
Free student and then
Yes.
this one.
Yes, sorry.
That's fine, no problem. I'm okay with one.
Yes. Yeah, but I need to put Emma in the student one. Right, you asked me yes, PM, right? Yeah.
But then you copy them in anyway for the.
Okay, I don't want over, okay,
Yeah, copy Juliana and Emma and then we.
Okay,
we
yes.
put both those things on.
That's
the-
great, thank you.
How you been?
Yeah. And like, I'm glad you don't do that. No.
Then first days of June. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm doing a good job.
Stomach bug.
We've already had an interview yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's more interviews today. He sent 60 emails out.
Yeah, it's just very busy.
Got something like
All this stuff going on and then a ton of other stuff.
But there's, yeah, some of them want to do a questionnaire. These were happy to interview for a questionnaire as well, which is, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty.
Yeah. Aaron, Charlotte, and me yesterday. I can't remember really well. It's, yeah, it's, it's running along now.
I don't know what.
Yeah,
Sure. Somehow I was searching. Yeah.
Big machine. That will go fast, won't it? 5 weeks, yeah, but it's up and running.
It's supposed to be like. Yeah.
It'll depend on everyone's availability. Yeah, I think if we get, I think we don't really need to put much on spending, like, start getting something around where you struggle to analyze.
Your first year.
I saw some of the responses, I can copy the mail inboxes, full of these. Some of the people who responded have said, oh, this is really tapping into something we're thinking about or haven't thinking about. Yeah, so. So that's good. I think one of them sent their, I think someone.
I mean,
But I had a look at the body copy factor for their stove. I just did a quick conversion this morning, it's per meter cube, but per kilogram, I think like 0.25. I think it's like more than the concrete. About 0.16, about. So, yeah. Yeah. It might be, so what is the next kind of
So we all compare.
relate to EPD. You see where it's in relation and environment. Consumer stuff and timber is trying like, there is a wide range of what it comes by. Trying to figure out what the important aspects are. Yeah, this EPD I've been installing wasn't very transparent. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know that. The actual having articles, interpretation, yeah. No, it's not. I'd quite like to do a, small underground check. Yes, check the time of the chairs, 12. And then probably to the- So, majority to be maybe one each and have a little mini stone. Yeah. Definitely, pretty good for a lab based one, to like, get some samples from someone.
So we got nowhere in Western.
You know, actually, those places, mandates to do that. Yeah, do that in lab based one, still from home.
Contacts to, see if the
Weeks, really,
They go quite far north. Something actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be, there is an inherent difference, I think, in you don't have to have a furnace making this an empty. So it might be the sun at high at the moment. Yeah, it feels like the trajectory being decarbonization should be better. But yeah, you're right, it's the sky is any better at the moment. Yeah.
Not saying it's not.
We have.
It's not more than the pitching I was doing yesterday, to be honest, but it's just, because I'm like, oh, actually, what made me interesting is, particularly now with the, I was thinking that we have something. I think that we now, some very best on the fiber from the here, and I've been terrified of opening the box because they didn't sign us like that. After a month closing the box. Okay, so we did everything outside, super.
Bolted onto a frame, so not like the load bearing walls, but like thin veneer pretty much. But you can imagine with a gold touch and nothing, and there's be a lot of wasted. Yeah. It is mad how like you would have a concrete structure, steel frame.
Also because other kind of plants
Even in the solar system, you have like
that's a good thing.
secondary steel work. You can then
Well,
bolt thin slice.
The whole point is.
And they'd even bring the ground between them. To make it look like it's low bearing.
Let's say protocol, but the idea of creating one thing that should apply to everything now doesn't really, doesn't really do what you want to do because maybe it's really. Yeah, it could be. I think I'll try to start in public and use it to the everything.
It would be cheaper.
At the moment, and understand exactly what kind of people we need to have in every relation.
No, the right.
We know, for example, now that we're starting, it's like we need within the same maps, we have to access to get it up. At the beginning, we were thinking of doing
but that would be really good.
same location. Then we realized that
Another thing is over to
that's
agree
not gonna
on a
work
bigger project.
because you have a problem on delivering. So we need to find the first, and then
Yeah.
what they're doing on the testing protocols,
That's
like
right.
then
I
we can
reckon
apply
it.
it to the different parts of
Yeah.
Yeah, because we need to compare the data. So we need to have a certain procedure. Then, of course, in case some
Effectively,
some solution or specific ability we can be used.
Oh, yeah.
For
Well,
example,
really fascinating. Yeah, the Matthew.
I don't know if that may be the option, I don't know
Guide
the
basically.
reason for using that, but in case you have one facility,
Really,
sorry, one is the.
very good post, very interesting, very
We
engaging.
will find a way to have all the.
It's very open,
For
it's happy
example,
to like general ground. Okay. There was a section of the mine that we didn't have time to go into. It was like, oh, people go down there, just like let me know, we'll go down there another time. Very generous. Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, the difference between what you see on the surface, which is like an old warehouse, that looks like my office, and the occasional times they're coming out of the hole in the ground, carrying some blocks of stone. Compared to the specials going on underground, it's just incredible. It's flat. Yeah, I mean, those kind of things work. And what they do is, so they're at the active phase, a few like cutting machines. Chucks out and then things get dropped, but then truck and take around by the tractors underground. There's a lot of wastage in that, so there's all these like what's rubble basically. They just all the old funding get backfilled with it, mostly because of the Russian protest. So the old kind of just where different. They're interested in trying to partly just to make space, but also like a sort of easy revenue stream, finding uses for all these hundreds of problems. I say rubble like sometimes quite a big chunk. They also, sometimes product, the thing they get most money for is kind of quite large blocks of critical stone. They also have this thing that they call horses' heads, which are big chunks that are irregular, because they might cut through like a discontinuity in the rock, or like every now and again they get like a fade or whatever. So they have their worth like okay. They have a lot of many different projects that clients, customers who use that, you know, cut up and they go down. So some of the more kind of bespoke or skilled or just like I guess and I think it's at the moment, but now they've realised, they've done some tests and realised can be used as agricultural land. So they're looking into that option because there's some wind that's really down there. In some places, they're using water. Yeah, it's really interesting. The technique they use, so back in the olden days, they built a timber, some steel frame to support the roof, but everything they do now is actually, so they're doing loads of drilling. And they drill and then put steel now chemical stuff. On my side, and that's the way everyone does it. Aspect to you, that's why. So it's steel kind of girders that are quite like violent steel. That's why we definitely people are saying and then that's sandwiches up and sort of neck and neck. But they're using quite a lot of steel work between the anchoring the cables and all the steel work in the ceiling. There's quite a lot going on, so I'm sure that that's quite a bit of everybody. Yeah, and it's just like the roof is just full of huge gaps, and they're doing all these calculations about the size of the chunks, and they're working out approximately the mass of these chunks that are hovering above them, and then working out how many anchoring points they need to put in. They do, yeah, no, they yeah, yeah. I guess because what you're relying on is the ground above to be sort of arching, and then you to start that arch. Yeah, but that seems to be the standard approach. And there's kind of on the fly calculations they do with you know, you discuss quite a lot of the safety factor they use. So I mean, they assume very little support for these training plans. They say, okay, how big is this block? How does it weigh? And then we'll anchor it.
Nasty chemicals, then so you know, so it's all about playing that.
So you enter.
And then the next
like
step
the
is the process. Because, okay, something very, very, scale it up, what kind of, because you may find the perfect, you may find the perfect property of the material, but then you don't have access to, I don't know, a verification system or a rejection process.
I'll send photos, like,
Then if you need to bring this material, bringing abroad, making a truck, then bringing it back, it doesn't take.
So help us take the action.
He worked out the application being informed based on the
For
context, and that would make the protocol a little bit more flexible. Because we need to find this flexibility, and that's we need to have as many cases as possible, because we need to find, and again, the main idea is we can't really find a solution that fits all. Not the.
we need to go to the go
I don't want to still in the meeting, yes.
To get fresh air in there. You're talking about 5 miles from the.
Yeah, I noticed that I'm the only one still in the. That's fine, you can be there.
It's not sustainable to wear much up. No. Probably like. There are like 15, 20 people down there, something like that. That mean. Most experience in the highly paid people are little operating that machine that they have. Then there's very other people doing the anchoring. Roof. Setting all that up. No, he's driving these little tractors around like. They've got the stone and then. A little garage for fixing equipment, it's all underground. Planning permission they get from the government, everything underground.
That's mine. Yes, it is. Sorry? I was trying.
Yeah, working for you.
Thanks, it does. I mean, when I have
Yeah.
and I was, because I prepared to have the slides on my laptop.
Yeah.
All of a sudden.
Or a map as mine operated about.
I was trying to open an Excel file. That's not a very I said, okay, I'm just going there and start arguing with people. That was the approach.
Which has been driven.
So yes, and no. It helps a lot. When you're in this kind of visually shows how you can really use it for that. Not 100%.
Yeah.
No, the big difference actually is the keyboard. The keyboard that helps a lot. Yeah, I hate it. I mean, that's not me.
He does like an annual.
It's embarrassing.
It is.
I've never put it in
Yeah.
as a present. So I would have never
Accepted it.
But I said, this is immoral, how expensive it is.
Yeah. But it's good.
Yes,
Story.
better than the other
Building on the.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the
house of concrete.
Yeah. It's better, but.
Where they used to know that.
And then they did a lot of
We're back.
because they understand they only
Oh, yeah.
So when are you ready for the, so did you?
We're actually. Stick that is also and sort of have a bit of service. And just have a little bit.
The racial place.
In.
Around media. Then, getting unique with that starts, but some of the people. I mean, often say a little bit.
Yeah.
The drawing line work didn't work. In all really. Yeah. Yeah, it could be really good.
Okay, to the next.
But what we do is we need to figure out exactly how to collect it.
It would be finished, would be quality, and then look at the.
Compared to concrete, you need to figure out why that is.
Yeah. No, you put one else in the
Study family over there. My weird grounding session. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't think any was even. It's like, it's also deep. South American, samba. Problem with but he did actually go on. We would be going to be responsible. They knew what they were doing. You can see the huge from yes. We were actually, we were supposed to perform Sunday at the Batrek. The Batrek would have won, it would have been the final, but they lost. So everything was cancelled at the very end. Say, oh.
How much did they lose by? I didn't get to see one.
I don't know because I was stuck here marking and I was hating the word.
Oh.
So at the end of the day, well, they lost. I could have not gone. I was being mean. But so I don't know if I'm going after to practice because I think next day I stay up here delayed, and then I go the next day because otherwise what's the point? It's actually be around 5 minutes. Would come down?
Yeah.
But if I come down, we'll see. I'm happy to say hello. I program committee. It depends on the weather.
Enough weather, no.
I've been around the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have thundercloud in the hotel?
I mean, you must have actively managed what you say yes to.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were
Traveling against the penalties. I don't. Is there rain?
Yeah,
So now we have the logo. Everyone have the logo.
Yeah, it's it's
Oh, we're going to the haircut.
Oh, yeah, no, they're beautiful, yes.
Yeah.
You can see there's a nice, so, if you go to Black Book down, the other side, down, I think we did it, when we had a miracle last year. Nice.
From here to what into the, you know, through the. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's.
Yeah, we can do Yeah.
That's. I love to show it to people.
It's so bizarre, it's like you're walking through this field and then there's literally like the part against the wall.
Just a facade. It's not a relic.
Oh, it never.
Well, no, you know the story.
No.
So in the center, I think it's good to have the name. So you know what the land. Sometimes you can show it something. That's one just usually build only the facade. So it's like 2 towers in the door, so nothing is thick.
It's so funny.
It's you can see the other side of the campus. It's a whole different thing. You see a couple of those. Yeah.
So you get off again, if you're up for. That's good.
I remember seeing something about how the satellite they found.
And then that way you can be.
Horrendous, like, one really bad stuff. It was,
And then tomorrow, when we're doing the area campus, we'll go by Champion.
operation with was, but it was not yet. Again, it's coming like whole big of this optic head, but it's only relatively new.
Tomorrow, possibly, seeing where you're facing.
What's going on? What is it? Ground down and then thing on the ground and they're not doing it in a very good way. And it's just going out. And no one knows. Have you seen those videos?
Because you did the problem.
I was thinking. Well, one more like this route from here. So against it. And then and then from there, we can go up there. Like that.
Okay, I see. Oh, yeah. Probably 1 hour-ish. I don't know.
With the force field. Yeah. Yeah, be careful with the. No, it's not. The terminology. Yeah. Maybe something different. Did you tell them about all your targets in the department?
No, we have some. I mean,
Yeah, but usually the state of the
Yeah.
yeah. Very, very important.
The like encouragement so we can have that.
It feels more and more like you know what we kind of the right solution. It feels like that. Obviously, we don't need like new nanomaterials for. But yeah, we kind of think it a lot of the time. Oh, just do this instead of that. Got to name B. Yeah, just measuring it. It feels quite obvious thing.
I don't even see like sexual, but it's not Austria.
I think you
But,
yeah. So,
Why?
it also feels kind of singing back. It's like quite a lot of.
I told you, that's in the station.
Do you think the
One of my guests that you mentioned, was Francesca Stefania, but Stefania is not here because she had to quickly go to Italy just for the weekend.
Attacks are becoming more obvious. There's more confidence. Yeah.
Is that where it looked like? Where is he?
Yeah.
Is it really important?
I think just follow that.
Catania?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that's already interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. She's gonna be so when we have our chat. That's why it's better to be tomorrow so that it's otherwise it seems a little bit. Wait, what the weather here? Is itching. Yeah. We don't want.
I guess it's a tricky thing to say, isn't it? Because there's always been weather as well as climate. So if you have a big storm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She is happy.
Yeah. Then you see it now, it's like, oh, this was.
We have one person from Sicily, and then one person
Just a nice way of. I think we're configuring it. We're not moving the accuracy, the same this happens.
Yeah.
Oh, you said.
And then
Make sure you got them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Bournemouth is doing the same in the UK.
It's been a very.
How did you send it? Teams. Yeah, but come on, honestly, I can understand maybe that. And not to make it. I like. I like. You can find out. Okay, no, actually.
You take it?
I got it.
Calendars.
Like basically 80% of pandemic, we went around England. And we tried to do all of it. Probably it's a bit challenging because it's
Yeah.
But I don't know if it was done, that would be using. If you like the hiking around, go around here. That area over there, there's a really very and that would work.
If you feel it's involved. Be on for a long time. Now itself.
The south
It's very problematic as
the south. The north side, there's still there. Yeah,
definitions, because it's not actually. That's certainly not.
it's technically still a 7, I think. Well, you're
Doing this.
the X of the 7, so.
You can see it both ways. You can say that timber is the better than timber.
Western Superman is basically, yes.
Yeah.
Brown.
Yeah. So, yeah.
While it's that, I'm really fond of the south. The south of the UK actually are the nice.
Yeah, exactly. It's an appropriate not 4 times a day.
Technically, it needs a bit.
But then there's the whole thing on the. They didn't try to stop it.
No, I know, but the point is I asked, we have some judges, they know, but I can say they say, oh,
I
blah, blah, blah.
I teach a second year unit on different structural materials, concrete is a big part of that. And 1 year we got someone in from, like Cemex, one of the big concrete companies. Yeah, so oh, this is our perspective from a producer of concrete and what we can say how it's made and stuff, and it was really great. And then they put up this diagram of the concrete production process. You literally on the cement box, they have an arrow with the site, and the father gets captured, put back on the ground, and I had to just, I didn't mind it back. I had to get up and just be like, yeah. I shouted about it. I just didn't want that message to go across. All the evidence says that it never do it. I just have to just like in basic things. Yeah, it's actually very. That sort of thing happens a lot. We're going to teach us to do this and spot that. I think understanding best interest is an important thing. Oh man, okay. Yeah. Well, we said we do this whole logo thing.
Oh, yeah.
No prep.
This is good, you've got the logo and just sort of.
Something, whatever information to produce something.
Well.
Yeah.
No, not getting anywhere. I think we've had enough ideas.
I did try to bring down the.
I tried, but the no, it's not. I think I need to clean the also. I wanted to bring the menus. Where's my sequel? My lemon filament.